I'd like to start by borrowing the title of the forum. And as our Commissioner Lombardo said, I don't think it's accidentally here, the first forum of peace building. I mean, Bologna has a long history of participation of civil society in our both domestic and international affairs. So, shifting roles, changing rules. I'll start by the latter one. I mean, changing rules. So I'd like to zoom in a little bit just to give you some sketches of what the Italian system is. We have talked about the European, the global level, the European level, the very local with the municipality. I think there's kind of a middle level, which is the one at national level. So as I think most of the audience know, we had a new law and new regulations have been implemented since 3 years by now, with law under 25 2014, and which has somehow institutionalized the system of Italian cooperation. So Italian development cooperation, like somehow recalling what Dr. Sheriff was saying before, like this kind of mimetic approach, the imitation approach, reflected somehow global trends and at the same time the shifting of the geopolitical era. So our government decided to institutionalize the so-called Sistema Italia, which means the Italian system for development cooperation. We somehow try to integrate in an inclusive approach and holistic approach the different stakeholders of development cooperation in general and in specific of activities in fragile states and emergencies. So one of the first questions that came out both from the academic world and the practitioner, I'm actually more a practitioner rather than a wannabe academician maybe, but just practitioner for the time being, is that this an effective is an actual integration of stakeholders, particularly of the grassroots level, or it just kind of make up. So what's the role that after like 3 years that this reform has been introduced, can civil society organization have in general term in development cooperation and in peace building? One of the findings of this outstanding report that context matters for peace building, but matters, I mean, also in terms of the actors of cooperation. So our country has a strong specificity, which is we have this was in February. They were registered. They were officially registered at the ministry, kind of 272 organizations working in development cooperation. This is kind of a sign of a great vitality, at the same time, and heterogeneity, of course, of approaches, of practices, of traditions. At the same time, means that we are kind of fragmented, the sort of risk of balkanization of our efforts towards cooperation. This is not new, it's part of our history, and it is true also that at least in the last decade, there have been many efforts towards networking between different actors, and both within Italy and at European Union level, like Concord and, many other networks. Just to give you some number, I'm not a quantitative, but just a couple of numbers here and there. The Italian system, somehow we have seen, thanks to the presentation of Sheriff, that the funding for peace building has actually increased since 2014-15. The same in Italy. So somehow it's not specific things of our country, but it somehow reflected what has been the trend at global level. So there's been an increase in terms of financing of development cooperation, and also in particular in terms of peace building. We have, for example, you can find those data in the last report of the Italian Agency for Development Cooperation, which is actually referred to year 2017. We're still waiting for the 2018 one. There are a couple of data which were interesting for me. And one was that in 2017, The total funding for emergencies and fragile states, which actually are part of the Department number 7 of the Italian Development Cooperation, the total funding was 24 million euro, which is quite a number. It's quite an amount. But if you look in details, and this we come back to the importance of the context. 22 million were for the Syrian crisis. So this means that I'm just following the path of ECDPM, in which, well, there are particular events which triggers policy changes. So somehow, if we look at our country, there's only 2 million and something left for peace building activity, which are not related to Syria and neighboring states. And those 2 million went to Libya. Went to Libya maybe for history, for traditional ties, for strategic interest. Another data I'd like to show you is about the sector of intervention of our civil society organizations. With regard to the SDGs, and there was a question about that like 5 minutes ago. We see that the goal number 16 related to peace and security is just like in the ranking of the sectors of intervention, it's just at the 10th place over 17 goals, which means that, for example, the first is in education. It's also a matter of tradition and of national culture of the Italian system of cooperation, which has for long focused on education, health, for example, and gender. Those are still in the top 3 sectors of intervention of our NGOs. So peace building, it's actually very low in this ranking. And the question here, I don't have answer to this, it's just an open question. There might be a lack of interest in peace building. There might be a lack of expertise, maybe, of our NGOs in peace building, or it's kind of lack of funding. So space has shrunk for peace building. Or there's also maybe a matter of intimidation for practitioners working in fragile states and in violent conflict. So I don't have answer to this, but those are just open questions for trigger a dialogue and discussion today. So I remember when actually. It was ages ago. When I was a student, it was 20 years ago, peace building was very much on the top agenda, at least for students of development, cooperation, international relations. It kind of, despite the increase in funding, it looks like that peace building is not sexy anymore. Why that? Why that? This is the question we are asking ourselves. And we have seen, thanks to the panel this morning, different phases of peace building, from the NGOization in the 1990s. Today, so let's say that Professor Strathari this morning was saying that doing peace building was kind of subversive action. Then actually it was not anymore, that it somehow become mainstream, has become mainstream doing peace building. Then now maybe starting from 2, 3, 4 years, maybe things have changed again. So with sovereign practice in international affairs, populism, so something is changing there. And my question is, again, for the audience, for our panelists, don't have answer. Have institutions had a role in this? If institutions have changed, as they had, have they had a role also in somehow making peace building not sexy as it was before? Or is it just maybe a matter of geopolitical shifts, maybe, or simply that some context changed and so on? Still, I mean, there's still a big need for peace building. Last year, from OECD, 56 states were identified as fragile and 15 as extremely fragile. This means that in the last 15 years, almost half of the global population, I mean more than 3 billion people, were involved in some form of political violence. So it's not that there has been a kind of decrease in the need or decrease in the requirement, but still somehow there has been a strategic shift. So this brings me to issues of neoliberal order, neoliberal NGO addressed this morning by Oliver Richmond, which somehow made the actors of peace building, particularly the let's say global north actors of peace building, maybe less attractive to developing countries, but also some other issue. So, for example, one of the these, for example, are the peace-building actors, stakeholders, kind of actors of foreign policy. So, like pushing the agenda of the governments intervening in that particular specific conflict-prone area. I mean, what's, for example, the perception that local stakeholders and local authorities may have. Just to give an example, from my experience in Ethiopia, in the Horn of Africa, for example, working for an Italian NGO meant to be part of the government. The perception that both at central level, I mean central authorities at the level of ministries, as well as from the local authorities, like from the regional, the village ones, the face of the NGO was the face of the Italian government. So there were no distinction in the perceptions. So this is one of the issues I think we as practitioners have to address. Another issue had to be with, has to see with the effectiveness of our intervention. So, for example, there are, according to different scholars and different perspectives, there are different functions of civil society and civil society organizations that can potentially fulfill, and different phases of the conflict where they can intervene. And so there are some studies that highlight how in some cases, there's been imbalances between the relevance and the actual civil society activities. So, for example, many social cohesion initiatives like dialogue project, conflict resolution workshop, or exchange programs, peace education projects took place during conflict phases where conducting such activities was not highly relevant. Hence, they stood little chance of becoming effective. So this large difference in the effectiveness of functions. So, for example, the functions of protection, of monitoring, of advocacy, facilitation were more often effectively performed. Conversely, efforts aimed at socialization and social cohesion generally had a very low level of effectiveness in terms of reducing violence, contributing to agreement and sustaining peace. So what does this mean? This means that there are some, 3 minutes, sorry. There are some open dilemmas within the relationships, the web of relationships between civil society and the state. Also within the civil society itself. I mean, it was addressed before the issue of constituency. I mean, we don't have to consider the civil society as a monolith, as a static sector. Of course, there's so many differences and heterogeneity within that this can also trigger conflict. So some of the dilemmas that we have to respond is, one is, it's about, and it's been a recurrent topic in these two panels, is about the infrastructures of peace building, so the architecture. So, for example, in Italy, civil society organizations are actually dependent for like more than 1/3 from governmental funds. So this doesn't automatically transform them in government organized non-governmental organization. But still there's an issue there in terms that, for example, nowadays, if you present a proposal, even in peace building, which has now the keywords of migration within, well, make sure, 100% sure that your proposal will not be funded. So this is the state-society relationships, of course, affect the structures of civil society. Some of the dilemmas, and then I will conclude about, for example, yeah, of course, indigenous versus international peace building. I think that, for example, the local authority, the local level, the so-called decentralized cooperation might, for example, be a meso level in between the global trends, global actors, and local authorities. Also, when we talk about local authorities, keep in mind that they are not monolithic, they are not static, it's very dynamic. I've seen, as liaison officer for development cooperation in the Horn of Africa, I've seen projects that were endorsed, for example, by the regional government, but not by the district, at the district level. So this means difficulties for the practitioners to work, difficulties for the project to be implemented accordingly. Last but not least, about assessment and evaluation. It's very difficult. There are guidelines from OECD 2012 about the assessment of peace building, not peacekeeping, peace building activities, but it's very difficult to implement. So this report is kind of an attempt, of course, but it's very difficult to collect data on the field and actually to evaluate what the effectiveness of peace building activity is. I think that for the time being, my time is over, so thank you very much.